Hello, very good evening. Namaste and welcome to the Festival of Bharat. I'm your host, Sharan Citti. Today, joining us for a conversation is Ankit Bhuptani ji, and he's the founder of Hindu Queer Alliance. Ankit ji, namaste and a very warm welcome to this platform.
Namaste to everyone. Jai Hind, Namo Narayan. It's such an honor and privilege to be on the Festival of Bharat, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for your kind words. I've been looking forward to this conversation. And Ankit ji, let me begin by asking you what is Queer Hindu Alliance for those who are not aware of it, and why did you start it?
Thank you for that question. Queer Hindu Alliance is a support group which connects the dots between LGBT rights and Hinduism. For centuries, religion, any organized religion, has been used as a tool of discrimination against LGBT community. Wherein I found that for me as a queer individual who is practicing Hindu, there is so much of space for me within my faith. So I wanted to break this myth that religion is against LGBT rights, especially in a country like India, especially when we talk about Hinduism or all Indic faith for that matter, whether it is Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Hinduism, which has so much of space for diversity, which has so much of space for all kind of people, including queer people. And that is why I started Queer Hindu Alliance. So on the policy level, we have three agenda. The very first one is that we act as a support group for queer community members who are looking out for the answers of being queer from the religious perspective, especially from Hinduism. So if you are an LGBT person and wondering what it means to be queer and Hindu, or if you are a parent who have a question about your child, that my child has come out as queer, but does my faith accept my child? So if you have these questions related to religion, especially Hinduism and LGBT, we can provide you with the resources and help you navigate those answers. One. Second one is that we wanted to be the community voice. As we progress in terms of acceptance of LGBT rights, more and more diverse voices are coming out. But there were hardly any voice of queer community who comes from the Hindu background. And that's why I wanted to have a platform which talks about Hindu voice of queer people, which is so much minimal within the LGBT conversation at large. So second reason is to be the voice of queer Hindus. And third is being the support whenever a community requires. So for an example, during the pandemic, during the first lockdown and second lockdown, many queer people were struggling with resources. Many of them work at an entry-level job. They lost their jobs and had to go back to homes. But at the same time, there are chances that their family do not accept them. The space they have left behind and come to a bigger city to survive and find their own home were not sufficient enough to serve for survival. So wherein Queer Hindu Alliance supported through direct money transfer in terms of helping them with groceries, medicines, rents, and so on and so forth. So to support the queer community members in terms of various resources. So these are the primarily three reasons Queer Hindu Alliance exists.
Wonderful initiative. Congratulations on that. And I hope your organization grows more powerful and stronger by the day. And Ankit, when I was researching more about you and what you stand for and what you've spoken about, I came across a very interesting video where you basically talk about the desires on the path of bhakti and bhakti traditions, essentially. And I found that to be very interesting because you address the nuances of bhakti traditions. So for our viewers, could you please summarize that?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I am born in a Vallabh Sampradaya called a Shuddhadvaita Pushti Marg. And it falls under a greater umbrella of Vaishnavism, which follows the path of bhakti. And in the path of bhakti, we don't see desire as something negative. What we see desire is an instrument which needs to channelize. It needs to be diverted towards your Ishta Devata. Krishna, in my case, it can be any other Devi or a Devata for diverse of people if they are following the path of bhakti. So there is one approach where you say that if you get a desire, get rid of desire, control your mind. But wherein there is another school of thought which says that, hey, you are human. So desires are natural to you. Instead of trying to control it, which in most of the cases, we may just fail to control our desire. Why don't you channelize your desire? So instead of controlling it, saying it desires are bad, you channelize it. I'll give an example. If you go to a temple called Srinathji's temple in Nathdwara, Rajasthan, you will see that Lord Srinathji, which is a form of Lord Krishna himself, is worshipped in all opulences with so much of jewelry, clothes, music, cuisine, and so on and so forth. Here, all our desires are being channelized. So if I like to eat something good, hey, great, you can offer it to Krishna and have it as a prasadam. If you like good music, why don't you play it for Krishna? If you want to sing, why don't you sing it for Krishna? So instead of controlling your desire, cutting down on your desire, you channelize your desire for your spiritual growth. How wonderful is that? And that is what a Bhakti tradition is offering to us. And that's what I was talking in that video.
Extremely wonderful, very well described. In ancient India, it is said that we were much more accepting of different points of view, different traditions, and even sexualities and gender orientations for that matter. So, could you please brief our audience about that? Because I think, and later we'll get on to this about how the invasions and colonialism sort of made us inherit values that we were probably very not aware of. Right. So, in that sense, in ancient India, do you think we were more accepting as a community?
Totally, I agree that yes, in ancient India, there was so much of acceptance of diversity. The corporate jargon, which is so much is in trend right now, called diversity and inclusion, and now they call it diversity, equity, inclusion. For us in India, it was the way of life. We accepted all sort of diversities, and that's why we don't have a concept of one way to worship, one book, one sampradaya, and one. No, we have approached life in a multiple way, and all this path can coexist at the same time. That's how is the India in my understanding. That's what India and Indic culture stands in ancient time, and we should also stick to it in today's time. I'll give you a small example, and then we can talk more from the queer perspective. As a kid, my mom used to take me to a local nearby Shiva temple. As we go to a temple, she used to tell me that, Ankit, you need to go and do pradakshina. Now, for the foreign audience or audience who may not be familiar with this ritual called pradakshina, for them, it's an Indian practice wherein we enter a temple and we circumambulate the deity around the deity in a circle, right? And then we offer our pranam or we bow down to the deity. This ritual is called as pradakshina. Now, there are multiple reasons behind doing this ritual, but there is a one beautiful meaning which I really resonate with. And that is what happens when you circumambulate a deity, when you do pradakshina. You enter the temple and go around the deity.
Correct.
So your worldview, a Sanskrit word can be darshan. Darshan in my understanding is called as worldview. So if you're standing at point A and you're looking at the deity from that point, your worldview, your darshan may be different than a person who is standing on point B, than a person who is standing at point C, and a person who is standing at point D. And how many points can there be? N number of points, because there can be N number of points on a circle. There is limitless way to look at the world. There is limitless darshans available. Now, which darshan you are looking at right now, depending on the stage of your life. Now, if I fight with standing at point A with somebody who is standing at point B saying that, no, I am looking at the deities right now from this point of view, I think this is the truth. Well,
Right.
all I'm doing is I'm just being an idiot. I'm just being a foolish here, because the person who is standing at point B can have a different way to look at the same truth. So we need to find a way wherein your truth and my truth can coexist together and in the search of finding the truth if it exists. So this is the core philosophy of Hinduism in my understanding, that there can be n number of ways to reach the ultimate, and while we do that, there is n number of ways to live our life. And that is the core centric idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion offered to us from the Indic perspective.
Very rightly said. Wonderfully said. In fact, the codified laws that we see today are perhaps quite recent. And in fact, the unidirectional approach to our values is something that we were never aware of, and perhaps is something new again that is being introduced post the independence of India. But before we talk further, I think we have also inherited certain values which are not native, if I may say.
Absolutely.
If we talk about things like the Mughal invasions and the British colonialism, for that matter, and we can also talk about how even in concurrent times, the Islamic world in the Middle East or even the Euro-Christian societies are not very accepting of a queer community, and we see violence against them even today. But before getting into that, do you think these invasions and colonial experiences actually changed our perception towards a lot of these things?
So in my research of Sanatan Vedic Dharma, I have discovered over 67, hold your breath, 67 Sanskrit terminologies which talks about diverse gender identities, orientation, and expression. And this goes back to dates like in 200 BC, 500 BC in the scriptures such as Narada Smriti, Charaka Samhita, and so on and so forth, Shabdakalpa Druma. Now, when we have so much of diversity acknowledged, I do not have a proof of was it accepted or not, but it was acknowledged and considered as part of the society for sure. So look at from this point of view, that we in our ancient time, our scriptures, our rishis, and enlightened beings have talked about queer genders, diversities, and expression, not just one, twice, but they have described 67 Sanskrit terminologies. And anybody who's interested to know more about it can reach to me, and I'll be happy to share those resources. So there is ample amount of references to queerness there. Then we come to Mughal time, wherein we were put behind the curtains, wherein only one way to live life socially was acknowledged, also promoted. And then more than Mughals, from the queer standpoint, it is the British who brought in the law called as IPC 377, which criminalized us in our own land, which criminalized me by birth in my own home country, in my own home Rashtra. So I think Mughals for sure, on top of it, Britishers who came in from their biblical understanding of what is right and what is wrong, what is moral and what is immoral, and created the laws based on this biblical understanding, criminalized us. And what we in India did, we continued that law even after we got independence, till very recently in 2018, when Honorable Supreme Court of India read down IPC 377. So criminalization, marginalization, and extortion of queer community has been done by institute, first started by Mughals, codified by British, and continued by independent India after 1947.
So, do you think that we are on the process of decolonization, especially because Section 377 has been partially, at least, struck down?
Well, I am in total favor of the current state of IPC 377, because what has been read down is an act, a physical act between two consulting adults in their privacy cannot be considered as criminal, but it is still applicable to anyone who is below 18, which is very much needed. Whether you are queer or non-queer, you are straight or gay, doesn't matter.
Right.
So I completely support the current status of IP 377. That's why the legal term is called as read down and not complete removal of the IPC 377.
Right.
What has been read down and decriminalized is absolutely perfect, and this is how it should be. On the top of it, many people have this concept that we queers are like, pedophiles and things like that, and which is not so true. And pedophilia cannot be supported, should not be supported, and should be criminalized. IPC 377 is doing that, right? So I support the current status of IPC 377 as it is. There needs to be no change in it any further. The criminalization of consulting adults within their privacy was yet criminalized, which is read down, is what we wanted and has been done by Honorable Supreme Court of India after decades of fights in the courts by n number of community members in organization, and I supported it. But is it enough?
Right.
Well, I don't think so. Yet on a daily basis, LGBT people are being discriminated at various forums, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in education institutes or anywhere else. We need a proper Anti-Discrimination Act, just the way we say from the constitutional point of view that no Indian citizen can be discriminated based on their gender, based on their caste, based on their creed and class, so on and so forth. We need to add orientation as well as part of that nobody should be discriminated based on their orientation or expression. Point number one. Point number two, I yet do not have a right to start a family. Why I cannot call somebody who happens to be of the same gender as my husband, or start a proper dampatya with them.
Yeah.
So I feel that the Marriage Equality and Anti-Discrimination Act are something we should aspire for and we should work towards for sure.
Right. So that's the way forward, is what you're saying, at least in the immediate future.
Yes.
I would like to move into a little bit into the debates of what is happening today around the world, especially with the queer community and how they're being accepted in different parts of the world. First of all, if we look at LGBTQI plus activism from a Euro-Christian lens, from a Western lens of how it is carried out in Europe and America, how would you describe that, A? Because when we look at the very periphery of how the left is trying to promote this, especially by using high decibels, and has, would you say, a very heavy-handed approach to all of these things. How would you react to this, and what are your thoughts about this?
Interesting question. To answer your question number A, look, the LGBT rights in West is traditionally considered as anti-church because church stood for the typical conservative values, which talks about union between men and women. Anybody who questions that is considered a sinner because the biblical understanding of what is moral and immoral, natural and unnatural. So from the biblical point of view or a Western point of view, a traditional Western point of view, LGBT activism is standing up against the church, which has been implemented by a lot of LGBT rights activists and groups around the world, primarily coming from a left-leaning ideology. However, unfortunately for them, when this concept or framework comes to India, it fails because in India, all our Indic faith, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Buddhism, has some amount of space and room for diversity of queer people. There is some amount of acceptance of LGBT people. So you don't need to say that if you are pro-LGBT, you need to be against Hinduism, right? Or you need to be against any of the Indic religion. That doesn't work in India. And that is a challenge part here. Now, to answer your question B, continuing from that, this is where the struggle starts within the left ecosystem because they hate Indic narrative of LGBT, which is inclusive, because then it goes back or against their agenda. At the same time, they cannot openly say that Hinduism or Indic faith rejects LGBT. And that is where the people like me comes in a picture, wherein we are advocating that, hey, it's you can be queer, at the same time you can be proud Hindu. You can be queer and proud Sikh. You can be queer, proud queer and proud Jain or Buddhist. And then all these identities can coexist very comfortably.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, you have a question.
But just a small follow-up. And I'm sorry if this sounds a bit communal. I don't intend to, but that's the fact of the matter of how it is today. When we look at pride rallies in India, you see only one particular community being targeted. Now, there is discrimination against the queer community from all religions, according to me. That's what I personally believe. Because of different values that are inherited, because of different reasons, so to speak. But why do you think it's fair that only the Hindus are being targeted through these rallies? Whereas I don't want to comment on this, but perhaps the other communities are much more aggressive in this manner.
Let me say this very openly on your platform, that I, as a queer Hindu, feel ashamed on many of the activities done by my own queer community members when they single out Hinduism and try to portray it as some kind of a regressive religion which has no space for queerness. Unfortunately, that is completely false statement. Hinduism as a religion have space for diversity, space for me, and I am super proud of both of my identities. Unfortunately, the people you see in these queer pride parades, I am part of it as well. I have been part of an organizing committee along with many other organizations and individuals for last 10 plus years who are organizing Mumbai Pride. But unfortunately, the most vocal voice at the prides are these leftist, anti-India propaganda people, They have a certain narrative to promote. They get fundings, they get acknowledgement, they get free foreign travels, and so many other privileges by showing India in a negative sense, by shaming India on a global platform. So saying that, look at us, we victims of this state and under Hindu majoritarian status wherein we are being victimized and we need your support, you need to be our savior, helps their personal agenda. And that is why it continues, unfortunately. On top of it, the non-left voices are not participating in the pride. And that's why I become a minuscule minority within these pride parades or the mainstream LGBT conversation.
Yeah.
But that does not mean that the non-left LGBT people do not exist. Yes, there are. I personally know so many of them. We have our own internal closed groups wherein we talk about each other, we support each other and have this conversation. But unfortunately, most of them are not comfortable coming out, because once you come out, you will be targeted by not only the people who hate LGBT people at any society in general, but at the same time by your own community. So I am a minuscule minority within a minority, but I refuse to be a victim. I am not a victim. I don't need your foreign money for upliftment. Hello, please. I am completely fine and have much more rights than many of my neighbors, which I see in my continent or I see around the world.
This is very brave of you, very bold of you to take this stance. And I hope more people do adopt the same and are inspired by you. Because why I bring out this contrast is, you see, even today, we are talking about 2020s. You see open terrorist violence against gay pubs in America or Europe. And in India, of course, there is a large amount of unacceptability, if that is even a word, towards the queer community. But the violence perhaps does not match up to what you see in America or Europe. And even for that matter, I think a few months ago, there was an attempt to organize a pride rally in Srinagar, Kashmir. And you saw how that went, right? So in that sense, do you think people who are queer and openly Hindu are a victim of cancel culture already?
Oh, yes, totally we are. I just don't like the narrative of oppressor and victim, so I will avoid those words. But yes, the cancel culture, trolling, name calling, shaming is something which I go through on a regular basis. But I'm completely fine with it at the same time, because somebody need to start talking about it. And unfortunately, I see by each passing day, more and more voices are coming out who are openly queer and proud of their cultural identities of Indic civilization. And the second and much more gentle and important point I want to put here is that I believe in the activism of care and not hate. For being an activist, I don't need to hate somebody else. I can approach with the values of compassion, care, conversation, dialogue. So संवाद होना जरूरी है. हर जगह पे आपको विवाद करने की जरूरत नहीं है. There can be multiple ways to coexist, and that's why this give and take, the dialogue, the samvad, that is what India stands for, needs to happen within queer community as well.
Right. Ankit, my last question is, what do you think about the current government's attitude? Let's not just call it government, even different political parties for that matter. I mean, this particular uh, conundrum has faced every party which was in power, and we've seen how they react differently. So about that in general, about how political parties perceive queer rights and LGBTQI plus community, and also what the current government is doing. Does it make even the slightest difference according to you?
Well, let me start by saying that we are really thankful to current government for not opposing IPC, not supporting IPC 377 in Supreme Court. They put it on the wisdom of the courts to do it, and the courts did it right in 2018. So yes, I think that was a great initiative. I really wish they would have supported the abrogation of Article 377 in the courts, but they did not find the courage, unfortunately, in that time. And I think that is still continuing. I don't know what stops BJP for taking pro-LGBT stand. They may be thinking that they may lose few votes here and there, or their core voter base may not be currently supporting LGBT rights, but I think they're far away from the reality. I know so many LGBT people who are BJP voters. I know so many progressive, middle class people, again, a core BJP voter base who are pro-LGBT. So I think the BJP as a party needs to find the courage to come out in the support of LGBT rights. Point number one. Point number two, politically speaking, I am quite disappointed from the current BJP government on various stands. Although I have been supporter of BJP government, have been a big fan of Modi, because most of the time my community member calls me quote unquote Bhakt, and I'm not ashamed of that title as well. But at the same time, from the queer rights perspective, I'm quite disappointed the multiple stands taken by the current government after 2014, keeping aside the IPC 377, when it comes to having children through surrogacy, where people were restricted. When it comes to supporting marriage equality petition, which are currently ongoing in various high courts of the country, including Delhi High Court, they rejected this to support marriage equality. And there are lot many discrimination cases are still happening against LGBT people, especially coming from the village and tier 2 tier 3 cities, and there are hardly any support available to this community members. So I think there is a lot more needs to be done by the current government, and I hope they would be taking a proper progressive stance which makes India proud and pride in 2022 on a global platforms as well. But at the same time, let me also acknowledge the work which has done by the current government. So starting with abrogation of Article 377 happened under BJP government. There is a national level board or a council formed by the central government to look after LGBT rights, especially the trans rights. And then quite a few members of the community whom I personally happen to know are member of it, and they're looking into how to improve LGBT rights, or particularly trans rights in the country. We can also see that the Trans Act passed by the parliament of the country, there were some challenges. They again address those challenges by issuing additional circulars and a modification to that act, which is a progressive step. So there I see a lot of progress being happening, but primarily focusing on transgender rights and not LGBT rights at particular, at a holistic level. So a lot more needs to happen for sure.
Ankitji, it was an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for speaking out. And I hope the government, the people take note of this and are more educated, more aware, and more sensitized as far as the queer community is concerned. Namaste, my pranams to you for all the seva that you're doing.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm so glad that a non-left platform like yours, which has so much of reach and people listen to you, is talking about pro-LGBT rights. It's time that non-left people also claim their space within LGBT rights conversation as well, because LGBT rights belongs to everyone who happens to be queer, left or non-left. And let's not make LGBT is equal to left. Let's break that myth, especially in Bharat. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, absolutely. And that is the attempt that we are trying to do, to break the misconceptions that the left has about the Hindu community. And hopefully a lot of people from the left, and in fact a lot of my friends, have been looking up to this particular interview of yours. So I'll be sending them the links immediately as soon as we publish this. Thank you, Ankitji, again for joining us. It was a real pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much. Namaste.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.